know your name, I swear I do. It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, what did you say? I've known you for how long? Your face is so familiar, but no name comes to mind. Please, can you remind me if you'll be so kind? Staring out into space, asking God to hear my case. Trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm Lori LeBay, the host and founder of Alzheimer Speaks. I'm really excited about our show today. We are so blessed to have Cheryl Stevenson with us, who is living with mild cognitive impairment, share her story. But before we go there, I always get people asking us, who is Alzheimer Speaks and what do you do? Because we get new listeners around the world all the time. So I'm just going to take a minute to kind of introduce Alzheimer Speaks. Basically, we are an advocacy-based company providing multiple platforms to shift our dementia care culture from crisis to comfort around the world. We're also viewed as a media platform because we have so many different modes. We have the radio show, we have the website, we have the blog, we have YouTube channels. We do various videos called Dementia Chats. And so please check us out. Just go to alzheimerspeaks.com and you'll get more information about us there. As far as what we do, we're really all about raising everyone's voice and helping the conversation get started. We strongly believe in sharing knowledge and just having comfortable conversations about how do we remove stigmas attached to memory loss? How do we help people live well with this disease and feel connected in their families and friendships and society at large? We also believe that collaboration is the only way we're going to win this battle against dementia, and we really know that it's working. These collaborations, you listening to us listening to you and raising your voice. You see, it's because of your likes, your clicks, your shares that we got recognized by ShareCare and Dr. Oz as the #1 influencer online for Alzheimer's. And we were also recognized by Maria Shriver as an architect of change. And again, that would not have happened without each and every one of you. And so really thank you. And while you're listening, if you wouldn't mind just clicking on the show and liking us, and go ahead and share it with your Facebook friends, your Twitter tribes, your LinkedIn colleagues, your Pinterest peeps, because in our spheres of influence, there are many people who are dealing with this topic who really haven't come out and told anybody. And, we all feel a little bit more comfortable in addressing something when we feel it's more normal than abnormal. So the more information people can find on it, the easier it's going to be for them. So please help us in that mission. I also want to mention that we are doing a dementia-friendly cruise and symposium November 11th through the 18th. And very excited about that. We have 4 people living with dementia who are going to be speaking. Harry Urban, Michael Ellenbogen, Lori Shearer, and Mary Reed. We also have Cindy Lazinski from Colorado, who's working on a dementia-friendly community there, and Becky Watson, who is a music therapist. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be really an interesting time, and we are so appreciative of our sponsors, like Music for Wellness, Free to Go Mobility, John Hopkins, the American Senior Magazine, the Dementia Friendly Communities of Northern Colorado, and so many more. So please, again, go to alzheimerspeaks.com if you're interested in joining us. There's still time to get in. Just go to our initiatives page, and you'll be able to find more information there. The last thing I want to mention about our show is that, again, we like to raise everyone's voice. So maybe you as a listener could be our next guest. Maybe you're living with the disease. Maybe you are caring for someone who has dementia or you think might have dementia. Maybe you are a researcher, a movie director, a singer, a songwriter, an author who has written about the disease. Maybe you are a business and you've developed a product, a service, or tool to help somebody. Again, we want to raise all voices and have a conversation. So please reach out to me. You can just go to the big contact button at alzheimerspeaks.com and go ahead and pitch me your story. I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to have the conversation. So let's get into our show today. We are going to be talking about relationships and how they can change with a diagnosis of MCI, or mild cognitive impairment. We are really excited to have Cheryl Stevenson back with us. She was diagnosed when she was 59 years old, and she is currently an active advocate for MCI and dementia at large. She started a blog in 2005 and has continued with her writings all these years, which I'm just so impressed with her tenacity. And she's been doing a lot of poetry here lately, and also started a YouTube channel that she hopes to do more videos, helping the rest of us understand what it's like to live with MCI. So welcome, Cheryl. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. How about you, Lori?
Doing great. Before we get into kind of our general line of questioning, if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit about your history to our audience. When did you notice symptoms, and what did the doctor have to say, and how did that affect you?
I think I was married at the time. I had 3 children. They were probably all teenagers. And I would say back in the fall of 1999 is when we really started seeing symptoms. It wasn't until I was at the doctor's for a torn tendon in my right elbow, and I was talking about the elbow, and I said, I'm kind of concerned about my memory. I seem to be forgetting things all the time. And I was 47 at the time, and it was back in 2005. And I think most doctors would have just brushed it off. He's not a doctor I had ever seen before. Didn't know him. He didn't know me. He was just in the practice that I went to. And he sent me, I think, for maybe blood work and a CAT scan. And then from there, he referred me to a neurologist. And he's now my primary care. And from there, because of my age, they told me I should get a second diagnosis, and I went to a second neurologist. My first diagnosis was in July of 2005. My second one was a couple months later, and the second one was my first one was actually EOAD, early onset Alzheimer's. And the second neurologist changed it to MCI.
Okay, and that's the mild cognitive impairment.
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful. And so, and that just shows that this isn't a real fine art in terms of, it is subjective, and that you can have a different diagnosis or that a diagnosis can change with people. I've heard that many, many times from people. Yep. That they thought it was one thing and then it ended up being another. How did you feel when the diagnosis was changed?
Confused. Mm-hmm. For years, I didn't know which was the correct diagnosis. I'm like, do I go to a third doctor? Is it best out of 3? I didn't have health insurance for a while, and then in 2014, I saw a third neurologist. And he sent me for neuropsychological evaluation, which I had never had done. It was probably 4 or 5 hours of testing.
Mm-hmm.
It was brutal. It was horrible. I cried. And in September of 2014, I got the results of that, and it confirmed the MCI diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I know my mom went through that neuropsych testing, and she had 2 half days, and she was just a puddle. She is so stressed out and so upset and so tearful, and it was, as a family member, it was just so hard to watch how frustrated and upset and disappointed she was in herself. I mean, the list just went on and on, I think, with emotions that she described to us, and it was horrible. It was just horrible to see her have to go through that in order to get a diagnosis.
When you're taking the test, you can just see the face, and you can see the notes, like they're taking the notes, and you're like, oh, I know I'm feeling that part.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't make you feel good about yourself.
Yep. Well, that's interesting. Well, I appreciate you sharing your history with us, because I think it's really important for our audience to kind of have a little bit of a background on you. Now, with the diagnosis of the MCI and even the EOAD that you had there for a short period of time, did that diagnosis, do you think it affected your relationships with family members?
Oh, yeah. It's changed the whole dynamics of my relationship. I'm usually very outgoing, and there are times when I pull back, and I'm not as communicating with people because I'm not in that place where I can find the words to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's difficult for me.
Mm-hmm. How did family react to the diagnosis?
Well, my kids and my ex-husband thought there was something wrong because I was, they'd get home from school and I'd ask them, do you have any homework? 5-10 minutes later, I'd ask them the same question. Mom, you already asked me. I said, no, I didn't. Don't remember the first conversation. I'd ask them a third time. Don't remember first, second conversation. They're like, Mom, you already asked me. I said, no, I didn't. I thought they were, they were just telling me that,
Yep.
But they thought, I think they thought, Mom's being a nag, But eventually it was too many times that they said, Mom's having problems.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And the reason I can get it back to the fall of 1999 exactly is because my daughter graduated from high school in May of 2000, and I remember that fall. She just started her senior year, and she had a deadline. It might have been like October or November something. She said, Mom, we got to find the baby pictures, the albums, and they were packed away somewhere, and because we had moved, and she said, we got to find a baby picture. I want to put it in the yearbook. And I'd say, okay, Jen, okay. And I couldn't remember to do it. I don't even know if I remembered to even write a note to tell me to do it. It just didn't happen. My daughter was crushed. The deadline came and went. She was mad at me, and I felt terrible.
Yep. Oh, yeah, I can imagine. That would be difficult. Something that important, and again,
I let her down. I let her down. I didn't mean to. It just happened.
Yeah, the disease let her down. Because your soul wouldn't have done that if it wouldn't. If it would have known. Your mind, your heart, your soul. It just it's just this dang disease, and people need to understand that just because something's important or logical or practical or something that you've always done doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do it. Because if you can't remember, those particulars, it's not going to stick. And
that's correct.
And we as a society have to get out of just trying to make it so black and white, because this is a really I found anyways with my mom, it's a really gray area. And sometimes things go really smooth and other times not so much. And I found, mom couldn't pick the times where, she was going to be really clear and really concise. It just happened. Same with when she wasn't. It just happened, and it wasn't something she could control. Do you find that being the same case for yourself?
Yep. And my ex-husband used to say, yeah, sometimes you forget things, but you always seem to forget things that I want you to remember. It's like he thought it was selective. He thought it was selective memory. And I'm like, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think it's because we, as care partners, we, like everyone else, we prioritize what's important to us. And so then, and when we do that, then we take these things as being personal and being vengeful. And that really typically has nothing to do with anything. It's just a forgetfulness that's really quite innocent. It's not meant to be vindictive or mean or any of that, but that's how people take it.
Yep.
Is I think, a really, really common response. I think that's good that you pointed that out. How about with friends? How did they react to your diagnosis? Did that change your relationships?
They were shocked.
Mm-hmm.
They were shocked. They had I called my very closest friends, and I had 2 friends that were waiting for phone calls when I got back from getting the results from the first neurologist and got the EOAD diagnosis. And then the hardest phone call I made was to my mother,
mm-hmm.
telling her, and we both cried on the phone,
Mm-hmm. Was this a diagnosis that others in your family had at all? Was there any family history to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, there is none, but my dad died at the age of 57. It was a stroke during or soon after a quadruple bypass surgery, so he had heart problems. So I don't know. We don't know if there's any Alzheimer's or any memory impairments in my family.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we know.
And I think the whole genetic thing is really tough to track. I know that there's a gene out there, and you can get tested for that. But I've talked with so many people that they can count all of the people that they know in their family who have had some form of dementia. And it might have been called different things. It might have been called hardening of the arteries. It might have been called senility. It might have been Alzheimer's. It might have been called a bunch of different names because it's changed over time. But they remember there being issues, and yet they'll talk to their doctor, and the doctor's like, well, we don't think it's hereditary. But I know so many families that really question that. But again, we don't have the research to track that either. And so that's why it's so important, I think, for people to get involved in the trials, to kind of figure that out.
Yep.
I just met with the doctor. We had, my mom passed in 2014, and I just met with the doctor yesterday that was part of the clinic who did the autopsy for my mom's brain. Because I'm looking at it going, I'm in this industry, but it's just all medical jargon, and it's way over my head. And it mentioned Alzheimer's and Lewy body and, some Parkinson's type stuff. And so I said, and even some vascular things with stroke and stuff. And so I wanted to find out, what was this? And, he basically said, the dementia was so severe, but she lived with it for 30 years. She started in her mid-50s and lived for 30 years. He says, we usually don't see the atrophy and everything this severe, but she lived with it so long. And, and we kind of ruled out just, after talking, the Lewy bodies. He's like, they were there, but they probably weren't really evident. It wasn't, what took her life. And, actually what took her life ended up being pneumonia. And he said the strokes looked like they were more small strokes, and and then he said people have strokes all the time and don't know it. Mm-hmm. And So it wasn't, because I'm like, well, do you think it was vascular? Because her dad died of a massive heart attack. And, and then we talked about family history and stuff. And there really isn't a lot out there, but there's just so little known, and I think, I thank you for having this conversation, because it's going to get people to think a little bit more about
absolutely.
it. Now, you are going to be a grandma pretty soon. How do you think that's gonna play out with your MCI diagnosis? And you and I have talked offline on, just what a gift being a grandparent is.
I think that it's probably going to look a lot different than I would have wanted it to look many years ago, when I looked into the future, when I was raising my children and thinking about being a grandmother someday. And now with all my memory problems, and, it's been so long since I got diagnosed, and I live alone. My children are on their own. I have two that are married, one that lives out of state. My daughter and her husband are pregnant with twin daughters. She should be having them probably the end of November, beginning of December. So, we're very excited about that. But there's been some things that I've had to talk to her about, the conversations that I didn't really think I'd have to have. Like, we had a conversation one night on the phone, and, she sent me an email, and it contained an email address and a phone number of two people in her wedding party, two girls that I know, and her mother-in-law. So I looked at the email. I said, I know Jen was going to send me this email, and all right, I didn't know what to do with the email. I didn't know what to do with the information. I didn't really know why she sent it. I just know she sent it. So a week later, I talked to her, and she goes, "Did you get my email?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I didn't do anything with it." She said, "Mom, that's to help you with the shower." I said, "Well, wait a minute. We must have had a misunderstanding last week when we talked on the phone." She said, "Why?" I said, "I am not. There's no way I'm in any position to plan and take on everything that this putting on a baby shower entails. When you guys were younger and I was in my 20s and 30s, and I could take on planning a birthday party for, all of you guys, for each one of you when you had a birthday party. That's not the case anymore. I can no longer do all that. Can't do all the planning involved."
Yeah.
And then I have the anxiety of, what if I forget something? What if I do something wrong? Then I've got the anxiety of, I'm going to disappoint my daughter. My only daughter, my first grandchildren, I'm going to disappoint her. And I'm going to wreck her baby shower. And she said, I didn't, and she just said, I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know this wasn't something you could take on. I said, well, we had a misunderstanding, but no, this isn't something I can take on. I will help in any way I can. And it breaks my heart that I can't do it, but I have no problem with saying what I can do and what I can't do.
Well, and I think that that's fantastic, that you're able to do that, because a lot of people have never been comfortable at saying that, and knowing that no is an okay word, to state. And so I think that is wonderful. I did want to just note on the whole future grandchild thing. I was pregnant and my mom had dementia, and I'm just going to throw this out, and some people might disagree and think this was horrible, but this was the decision we made as a family. It was so important for my mom to be a grandma, to be able to spend the alone time with my daughter. And so my husband and I decided to let that happen for short periods of time. And I got to tell you, it was probably one of the best decisions we made, because my mom was so attentive to her. And, when I drop her off, she was changed and knew that she probably wouldn't have to be changed again. I would drop off the food And so, they could eat together, and it wasn't anything that she had to, make or anything. And then they would just play together in this intense play of, maybe they were coloring. When she was a little bit older, they would color, and I would come back to pick her up, and I couldn't tell who was prouder of their art projects, my mom or my daughter, who was 2 and 3 years old. And when she was younger, I would just spend time with them, but kind of walk out of the room and just give them some private time. And my daughter only knew her grandma with Alzheimer's disease. And, when she died, when my daughter was 25, they were just two peas in a pod. They were so close, so incredibly close. And it was really a gift to both of them. So I know some people will disagree with our decision, and every family has to make their own. But I do want to just give that positive light on that. Mm-hmm. There's also a video that was done by my friend Colin over in Australia. And, he talks about babies and aging population, period. And he said it's just kind of almost instinctual, dementia or not, to take care of a child. And they showed examples of them with a baby and maybe hot coffee, and knowing that needed to be moved. And just, it was pretty incredible, some of the research and stuff that they had done, and the love. And he said what they found was that it wasn't just a female thing. Grandpas love their grandchildren just as much as grandma do too. And they love playing with them and that joy. And I think part of it is, as adults, we get overloaded, especially nowadays, with all the things we have to do. And dementia, from my perspective, and tell me if I'm wrong, Cheryl, but makes you live more in the moment. And you can't deal with a lot of multiple tasks. So you're really in the zone of wherever you're at. And that's a gift in any relationship. If it's a child, if it's a spouse.
What I have trouble with is I noticed when I was working, I was actually working 2 jobs. It's the only way I could get divorced. I was working in special education, and I ended up doing that for 21 years, and I worked in an elementary school. And I noticed when I was working in the school that I had trouble with verbal multi-step directions. And I had the 2nd grade teacher that I worked with, and all of a sudden she rattled off 3 or 4 things. And I thought my head was just going to spin. I'm like, oh no, now what do I do? So I tried to remember all the steps that she wanted me to do with what particular student, and I just couldn't do it. So I went over to her and I said, could you just repeat that again, please? So she repeated it. I grabbed a piece of scrap paper and I wrote it down really quickly. And so I realized that particular teacher I hadn't worked with before. And when I was working, I didn't broadcast, hey, I got a memory impairment. It was a need-to-know basis. So if I worked with a teacher, then they knew. If I didn't work with somebody in school, they didn't know. This particular teacher didn't know about my diagnosis, and I realized if she's going to rattle off these verbal directions all the time to me, this is going to be a challenge. So I've got to find a way to work around it. So later on that day, I had some planning time, and I had written myself a note, make sure you email so-and-so. And I got on my computer, and I emailed the teacher, and I said, you probably don't know this, but I have a diagnosis, and I can't do multi-step verbal directions. I can do one direction at a time, verbally. If you put it on a piece of paper and you list it out, 1, 2, 3, what order, what steps, where you want, when do you want it done? I'm there. But verbally, you rattle it off. I'm trying to concentrate on the first thing you said, But in reality, all I'm remembering is the last thing you said.
Sure.
So the next day I went into her classroom, and there at the table where I put down my glasses, my reading glasses, and my pen and my water was a list for me. And so she got it. We didn't have to communicate anymore. She understood what she had to do to accommodate me so I could do my job.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And so, it worked.
Good. Well, I do want to note too, if we have listeners that want to ask a question, they can use the chat box. You just sign in typically through your Facebook page, or you can call in too, and that number is 323-870-4602, and I'll repeat that one more time, 323-870-4602, and we can go ahead and pull you into the conversation if you've got a question or a comment for Cheryl. Cheryl, another topic I would really like to talk with you about, you mentioned you got divorced, and and we're talking about relationships as a whole. How have you entered the dating world, and if so, how has that worked for you?
Well, I was in a long-term relationship. We were together almost 5 years, and I think we were dating a few months, and I realized that there was a relationship there that was probably going to last for a little bit. So I figured, well, I better kind of come out. And at that time, my diagnosis, I had both diagnoses, the MCI and the EOAD. So I had a lot of anxiety telling him, and through telling him, I started crying. And I remember he said to me, "Whatever it is, just tell me." And I told him, what was going on, and he said, "Is that all?" He's like, "It doesn't matter what you're dealing with. We'll deal with it together because I'm already in love with you." And he said, "So did you mean that there might be a time that you might not know who I am?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I don't really know. I hope not." And then, years later, in 2014, when I was still with him, when, I got it confirmed that it was MCI, I was like, "Oh, good. That means, I probably won't forget him." Well, there was a time I forgot him. We lived about a half hour away, so we'd stay at his place, and then years later, we'd stay at my place a few days. And there was one particular evening, we stayed at his place, and I describe it as the fog rolled in, and he looked at me, and I had a blank look on my face, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." And I said, "I don't know where we are, and I don't know who you are." And it scared the both of us, but I was able to verbalize to him what was going on. But even though I couldn't say where I was and who he was, I knew in my heart that he was somebody who loved me, which in itself is a confusing concept because, A, you don't know who that person is because you don't remember them. You don't remember the relationship and what it is. But then in your heart, you feel and you know that there's love there. So it's confusing.
Yep. Well, and I always felt that with my mom, that she might not get the name right, but she knew that it was a loving relationship. And so if she'd call me her mom or she'd call my brothers her brother, that didn't make any difference because, she was comfortable and she was happy and she felt safe. And it just made me think, what more can I really want? Is my ego that big that she has to say my name? Am I that insecure? And when you look at it in that fashion, because we don't look at it as egotistical for someone to have to know our name. But when you step back, it really is, because it's really more about our comfort than your comfort. And if we're truly caring for somebody, it should be about their comfort. and our compassion and empathy to be able to deal, with the situation, knowing that we're much more than just a name, or I would like to think we are, anyways, with that. So
yeah. So I'd like the listeners to know that, if you're having memory problems, start with your primary care doctor. Take notes. Let them know what problems you're having. Before I got my first diagnosis, it was repeating things, it was getting lost in familiar places, and it was word finding issues, and it was problem with organization. And I guess in a way I thought, okay, once I got the MCI diagnosis, it means I'm not going to forget my family and somebody who's close to me who I love. But in that relationship that was long-term, almost 5 years, it happened, and it happened more than that one evening. It probably happened more than I even told him. And what was good about things was we had communication, and there were times that he could, he'd say to me, and he goes, "Are you all right?" And I'd say, "No, I'm not feeling right." And he goes, "The fog kind of rolled in," and I'd be like, "Yeah." And he'd describe it as I would be staring into space, my eyes would look very glassy, and I would be somewhere else. I was not present where he was. Once in a while I could communicate with him, and there were times that I couldn't because I was somewhere else. But to get somebody else's perspective on that was good. But during that time, he would say to me, "It's okay. It'll pass. It's all right. You're okay. You're safe. I love you. We're okay. It's all right. Everything's okay." So he would just try to let me feel okay, that everything was going to be all right. It'll pass. You'll come out the other side.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Now, another topic I'd like to talk about is just regarding doctors and therapists and kind of strategies, because sometimes that can be really mumbo jumbo and with multiple people or not permanent physicians, and how does that affect you with your MCI?
Most of the time, when I go to my doctors, I see my primary care, but there are times when I see different physician's assistant and different people, and I usually do okay with that. But I had a fall at my job at school in April of 2014, and I am now out of work as of June of 2015. I'm actually not working anymore because of the fall. And with that, I have an ongoing problem with the left knee, and I've had surgery with that and the left shoulder, and I've been seeing a new doctor. And even though you can say I've got a memory problem, they don't really look in your records and say, well, she's got this diagnosis and research it or anything. And he decided that my thigh muscle needed to be, it was weak, so we needed to work on that. So my last appointment about a month and a half ago, he said, well, let me show you some exercises. And I just looked at him and, did some of the exercises. And I said, I have a problem with my memory. I said, I'm probably going to remember these before I even drive home, the 15-minute drive home. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll write it all down for you. I said, okay. Not knowing what his writing down was really going to consist of. So he left the room. The medical assistant came back in and said, oh, we want you to make an appointment, X amount of weeks, and gave me a half sheet of paper with a list of 5 exercises. No pictures, no graphics, no pictures, nothing. No explanation, really, just whatever the name of the exercises was, do, 10 times, 10 repetitions once a day. And I looked at that paper and I just wanted to cry. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's setting me up for failure. And I said that to the medical assistant. I said, well, this isn't going to work. So I just left there feeling defeated, and I had to go back to my regular doctor a couple of days later for something else. And when I went there, I saw a physician's assistant, and I said, and they're kind of related to the same doctor that I was seeing for the knee, only they're in a different office, but they're the same practice, if that makes sense. So the other doctor has access to all my records. And I said, well, maybe you need to, like, put something on my record that said, you know, MCI Diagnosis, make sure when this patient comes in, you know, make sure that there's an understanding of what you're telling her, you know, note that she has a memory issue. And all the physician's assistants said to me, well, perhaps you just need to show up at your any of your doctor's appointments with a little notebook so you can take notes. So at that point, I just kind of shook my head and kept my mouth shut because she didn't really get what I was trying to explain. So I was having a conversation with a friend, and I was very frustrated. And I'm like, you know, what do I do? There's no way I can do these exercises. And it's not my job to Google them. They should have given me the information so I could be successful. And my friend happened to say, why don't you just go back to physical therapy? I'm like, perfect. So I called my doctor's office. I said, can I just go back to physical therapy? So played phone tag for a couple of days. They finally called me back, and they said, yeah, where do you want to go? So they faxed paperwork to a physical therapist where I had gone before for my knee and shoulder. And this is the only person that I will see for physical therapy because I've told him about my diagnosis. He gets it. I have no anxiety. I can go there. He can show me the exercises. If he kind of sees a blank look on my face, he knows he has to show it again, explain it differently, and then check with me and say, you all set with that? And then have me do it, and then he goes, you're good. So I can only go to one person for physical therapy right now because I have no anxiety, and that's huge.
Well, that's good to know, and to be able to monitor that and make sense of that versus spinning. So I think that is wonderful. Cheryl, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, gosh, our time is just flying here, so many different things. Just briefly about finances, and I know that you're not working and stuff now, and housing situations, because I hear this from so many people. Everybody thinks that everyone is living with somebody and there's someone to take care of all the major responsibilities, but when you're on your own, you're on your own. How are you doing?
Well, I live alone, and when I was working, I had to work 2 jobs to support myself. I worked as a paraprofessional at school, at an elementary school. I worked 6.5 hours a day there, and then I had to get a second job, and that was as a cashier at Walmart. So each week I worked, I think, 32.5 at school, and I worked 16 hours at Walmart. So there were 3 days, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, that I'd work 6.5 hours at school, and then I'd leave school and drive 15 minutes to Walmart right down the road. It was actually 10 minutes, and I'd start my 4-hour shift at Walmart. So my 6.5-hour day turned into a 10.5-hour day, but 12 hours by the time I got home. So those days were very difficult because they were very long, but I was able to support myself for several years. Now on disability, my paycheck once a month is $500 less than what I was making when I was working 2 jobs. So I had a workers' comp settlement, and I've been dipping into some of my savings, and I realized a couple weeks ago when I was doing my bills and doing my budget, and I'm like, whoa, because my ex-boyfriend and I broke up in May, and so I had somebody sharing the responsibility for several months from last August to this May. So now all of a sudden I had to take on, all the rent and all the food and stuff. So suddenly my once a month Social Security disability check was not covering everything. It wasn't. It was covering my rent, and then I only had $200 and something left over, or maybe close to $300, and I still needed to pay car payment, car insurance, medications, food, and gas for my SUV. So there was no money left over. Yeah, actually, once I take my rent out of my disability check, I have $265, and that wasn't working. So I was taking money out of my savings, and that's going to disappear. So I realized I was like shocked, and I was like, oh no, now what do I do? So I had a conversation with a friend and ended up working that into the conversation, and her husband actually has frontal temporal dementia, and she works for Easter Seals and does a lot of work with caregivers and steers them to the right resources. And she says, well, we got to get you some housing. And I said, okay, so, what does that look like? So trying to think changes for somebody who lives with a memory impairment. Not a fun thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I've lived in my apartment. It'll be 9 years in November. I've lived in the same apartment. And there's been times when I said, well, maybe this particular item that I work with in the kitchen shouldn't be in this cabinet. Maybe I'll move it up to this cabinet. And then I'll go, no, I better put it back. And there's one reason that I have to put it back. Not because I choose to, because I have to. My brain is only going to remember where I had that item when I bought it or when I moved into the apartment. If I moved into the apartment with that item, where I put it. It's not going to remember where I put it recently, because my brain deficits, my memory issues are short-term, not long-term.
Okay.
So then I'd have the frustration of knowing, well, where did I put that cheese grater? It used to be in this cabinet. I moved it. So I can't move. I can't move different things around. It has to stay where it's been, whether I like it or not. So then when I thought about, well, I now don't have enough money to support myself, so I'm looking at housing that will help me. I forget what they call it. But anyway, with that, I cried off and on for like 3 days because there was a lot of anxiety with moving and getting acclimated to a new apartment, and then trying to remember where I put everything in my cabinets and finding space for everything. And then it was just overwhelming to try to think about it.
Yeah, I can believe that. Cheryl, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, you've been doing a lot of writing of poems and things. Can you share with people how those come to you?
2011, I started writing. I started writing in 2011, and it just accidentally happened. I was on Facebook. I was on one of the groups I'm on. And all of a sudden these words started flying around in my head. And I said, okay, I'll open up a Word document. I started typing, and it just has spun out from there. I have, 30-something finished poems and a folder on my laptop that has like about 30 unfinished poems that need to be chipped away at. But I don't know how they're born. It just sort of happens.
I was wondering if you would feel comfortable if I read part of one of your poems
Sure.
on the air. If there's one called "Which Path Will You Take?" and you wrote that. It looks like in June of this year. It says, "The path of acceptance or the path of denial. The path of denial will prevent you from treasuring those precious moments together, but acceptance will allow you to cherish those times together. The journey of dementia is filled with lots of twists and turns, but it can also be filled with joy because you learn to appreciate the littlest things in life. Acceptance will make it possible for you to realize that you can still make those new memories. You will accept that it's okay if the person with dementia doesn't remember, because you will always have those memories for them. The path of denial is lonely and sad. The path of acceptance is filled with new adventures, bumpy roads, and even some joy. Staying on a path of denial can be a waste of time because you really aren't enjoying life. Instead, you are exiting it. Living in denial is pretending that your life hasn't changed, even though it has, and it will continue to do so in the future. Denial means you're not using this time to educate yourself and others, and you're probably not surrounding yourself with a good support system for now and in the future. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up, but rather learning how to live in the moment, enjoying all the good times that still can be lived. Denial can be a very dark place to be. Acceptance can help give a patient a sense of peace. Acceptance makes it possible for me to learn how to live my new life. Denial forces me to not move on, but rather stay stuck. I choose acceptance. Which path will you choose? And, I think that those are some really brilliant statements there about life in general, dementia or not. How do you want to live your life? Because it's constantly moving and changing. And so I would encourage people to go to your website, which we have on the radio page, or if you're listening from the blog, it's listed there. But the website is bowl-coach, and then wixite.com/my site. But it'll just say website on the radio show or on the blog, and it'll connect you right there to Cheryl's writings. Again, she's got some wonderful poems and some wonderful blog posts, and she's been writing since 2005. Cheryl, do you find that the writing for you is healing?
Yes, I have found it to be very healing, and I'd say the majority of my poems are about living with a memory impairment. But when I was married, I was in a verbally abusive marriage, and I didn't leave until 27 years. So I think my writing started from that abuse because I couldn't fight back. I journaled, and I hid it in my underwear drawer. And I prayed that he wouldn't find it because it would cause more conflicts and more anger that I didn't want to deal with. So I have since written a poem about the verbal abuse, and when I first wrote that, I couldn't read it without crying. And then the more I read it, the more I kept digesting it. I'm like, I'm okay. I'm beyond that. I've moved forward, and that's the past. But especially that poem has been very healing for me to get all that out. And actually, I titled that one, It Was Not My Fault, because when you're in an abusive relationship, you do blame yourself.
Yeah. Well, and I think writing is healing to those who write, but it's also really healing to others who read it as well. I mean, it's just kind of a win-win situation. I know when I started writing, when I first kind of stepped into this space, I was encouraged to write, and I was shocked at how many people resonated with what I wrote, because their stories really aren't all that different from one another. But it's getting that conversation going, that thought process, and knowing that you're not alone. You've done some videos too, if you want to talk about those really quick.
Yeah, I've done a few. I think the first video I did that I uploaded on YouTube. Are you on it? I don't know if.
No, I think that was on. That was on.
I moved into my apartment, and I had journaled about July of 2005, the day that I got the diagnosis. And I had forgotten about the journal, and I found it while going through some things when I moved into my apartment. And I had moved into my apartment in 2009. And I made the video in May 18th of 2011. Right away when I found the journal, I'm like, I need to make a video about it. And it wasn't about making the video for me. I wanted to make the video to help other people. So if they recognized any symptoms I had, that they wouldn't just brush them off, that they would say, oh, I really need to have that checked out. And I made another one recently about, I don't know what it is about chapstick, but there are days that I can take this tube of chapstick, which is usually on my snack tray, and I can take the cover off, I can look at it, and I have no clue how to get it to the top. I don't know if there's something on the bottom to turn it. I don't even know what it's called, even though the name is on the side of it. I'll write it on a shopping list, and I'll write lip stuff, and a day or two later I'll go shopping at Walmart or something, and I'll look at it, and I'll, like, giggle to myself. I'm like, oh, that was the day that the fog rolled in, and I didn't know it was chapstick. But you just have to laugh at those moments. Otherwise, you can't stress out about all of it. I'd be a best case.
What I like about that video when you're doing it, it just shows us how much we take stuff for granted, you know. And I mean, I remember watching it and putting myself in your shoes of not knowing how to do a chapstick or a lipstick, and how frustrating, you know, that must be. And yet it's something that we think, you know, is just a given. And, you know, we can't take things for granted in life. We really have to appreciate our ability to do certain things. And I think it was just a nice way to connect people with how even little things can be, you know, overwhelming to achieve when kind of that fog rolls in with that. Well, Cheryl, I so appreciate the time that you've taken with us today. Again, you can get a hold of Cheryl. You can go to her website, her YouTube channel, or her Facebook page. We have those links there available for you. And again, I think this was a really, really interesting conversation. So I appreciate your time, Cheryl.
Well, I want to thank you again for having me, Lori.
Well, good. Thank you.
Just part of my advocacy work that I need to do to try to help people understand what it's like to live with a memory impairment.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to wrap up here just with a few comments. All of our shows here on Alzheimer Speaks Radio are archived, so please feel free to check any of those out and pass those along. I also want to mention that I'm going to be doing some screenings of his neighbor, Phil. I am going to be out with a TRIA in Massachusetts and Connecticut coming the end of October. And again, just reach out to me if you're in that area. We're also going to be doing some training on driving change in dementia care with the TRIA as well. Last, I'll just mention our cruise one more time. We would love for you to join us. And again, you can just go to alzheimersspeaks.com. and you'll see information right on our homepage, or you can go to our initiatives and projects page. And I'm going to just give a shout out to a couple other sponsors of that cruise. The art kit, which is absolutely fantastic with Lola, Footprint ID, the Call Alert Center, calendar cards, Trin Rose Seeley with her book 15 Minutes of Fame, or Nancy Kreisman, her book, The Meaningful Connections, Memory Joggers, and again, the 36-hour day and A Loving Approach to Dementia Care are all wonderful books that you might be interested in. You can also download helpful tips when dealing with dementia from our website as well. Until next time, have a blessed week. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Well, hi, I'm Lori LeBay, and I wanted to tell you about Alzheimer Speaks, which is another great podcast. You see, my own mother lived with dementia for 30 years, and I felt lost. Did you know every 3 seconds someone in the world is being diagnosed with dementia? Odds are it's going to hit your families too. We want to help you connect to services, products, tools, research, and stories so you can be prepared. Please subscribe to Alzheimer Speaks on your favorite podcast platform.